When you're a professional artist, there's this assumption that people think that you've gotten most of your skills in your professional endeavors. And for me, at least, and for a handful of artists that I know, that couldn't be further from the truth. The reason they became professionals and improved as professionals is because they consistently applied the knowledge that they gained themselves. However, once every while in a blue moon, you come onto this piece of information that is so good, it feels like it changes the trajectory of your art journey. And today, the book Rendering in Pen and Ink is one of those pieces of information that I swear by. It is by far one of my favorite books when it comes to just being an artist and drawing. It's one of my favorite books ever for drawing. And in this video, I'm going to give you the three main things it taught me, and it taught me really, really well. And I hope by the end of this video, I even convinced you to get the book because it just is so good. Now, before we get into this book, I have to tell you about another fantastic book, which is our Artwod ebook. So if you haven't gotten that yet, check the description. You can download it for free. It's completely free. And it will be the perfect segue and the perfect basis to actually understand the book that I'm about to review much better. So just click the link in the description. It's free. It's awesome. Definitely get it. Now, getting into the book Rendering in Pen and Ink by Arthur Guptill. It is sort of a draftsman book made for people that want to get into, as the book says, rendering in pen and ink. But I find the book deceiving, but in a good way, as in it undersells itself. It says rendering in pen and ink, which you end up doing. But this book teaches you so much more. And I'm going to get into the three main things that really help me understand much better. And number one, surprise, surprise, is form. The reason I love this book is because it helps you better render form, literally. It helps you understand how inkers would think about all of the ways that they can imply form, from spheres to cylinders to everyday objects. And I find this so incredibly powerful because, of course, this is a lot of what we teach in our beginner roads. And it's nice to see that concept was already very much alive back in the olden days. And it was used extremely effectively because the thing about rendering with pen and ink is that it's all about sort of, what they in painting would call brush economy is being economic with your paint strokes, with your ink strokes, so that you make a very pleasing end result without it becoming overly noisy or muddy or just, unpleasant to look at. And these people were masters of that. And that's what I love about this book. So yeah, form is absolutely awesome because what this book has taught me is that, you can do form in the basic way, as in you just apply the shadow shape and then you fill it in with just lines, right? That's the first thing. So you don't go with the form, you don't go necessarily against the form. You could say you do, but you just fill in the shadow shapes just like you would with painting. And that's how you start applying form. But then you go into a broader concept of what can I now do when I follow the form? And not only that, is how can I use lines effectively to showcase material? And so that's what I absolutely loved about this as well, is like it's not only about showcasing or giving the illusion of form, but it's also giving the illusion of material. And you start to realize, I started to realize through this book that everything I saw prior to that about how to, all of these tips and tricks about how to use soft brushes and special brushes to get a certain material look is all superficial bogus. once you understand how you can represent a material, you can do it with basic lines. That's what they taught me in this book, which I find absolutely incredible. So that's the first thing that I really understood from this book is how to better imply form and how to better imply material through form and, in this case, hatching or lines. And then moving on into the second thing, which was such a major contributing factor to the growth for me as an artist, was the power of learning how to simplify my light. Because I'm sure a lot of you experience this, that when it comes to light and shadow, you often get over complicated, or like you get overstimulated in all of these concepts that you need to understand, and it confuses you and you don't know what to do about it. And I find that what this book has taught me is that because they only have limited tools, literally, is that you have to make choices. And so you're not starting to make what I would call realistic choices in where do I put my light, where do I put my bounce light, and where's the terminator going to be, and what are the halftones going to do. All of that exists in terms of how they render things, but it's more about how can I make artistic choices. And I feel like sometimes we forget that when we're learning fundamentals is that we're the artist. We are the decision maker on how things are going to look. And I think they give beautiful examples of you are in power on how you represent things. And that's what I love about this book, because you can literally draw a chimney with hatching lines, with curvy lines, with straight lines, with chaotic lines, and still get you can get a very different result, but you can get the same outcome in terms of you're looking at a semi-realistic, believable chimney. And you do that by making artistic choices and simplifying things. So clearly separating light from dark, and then choosing how to fill in the dark and how to fill in the light. And for me, that made it click so well, is that I was no longer too confused about where's my light, where's my shadow. I was just like, okay, I just need to do two things: identify light, identify shadow, and work within each. And that's why in Artwod, I also have a road specifically for cell shading, because I think cell shading, very similar to this, is you just pick the light and the shadow, and then you work within those two fields, and it simplifies the concepts of light and shadow a lot for me. So this book has massively contributed for me on how I can do that better. And especially when it comes to very difficult to understand organic subject matters like a tree. Drawing a tree graphically is very easy. You have a trunk and you have a canopy. That's it. However, rendering it often becomes very tedious and very hard to understand. And here, again, it's light and shadow. Just pick your lights, pick your shadow, and then work within that and choose what strokes you want to use and stay consistent with them. Because often when we take our first steps into rendering, we start to render chaotically. We use 10 different brushes, we fill it in 20 different ways, and we end up very confused and so often demotivated on how to continue. However, what rendering in pen and ink has taught me is pick one sort of, it's almost like a signature stroke. Pick one, stick to it, and then use that to fill in your shadows and even your halftones. And a lot of the times, and this has to do with design as well, is you pick your strokes based on the material that you're going to draw. So in this case, the canopy and the leaves was more leaf-like, like curly strokes, because it gave the illusion of leaves, right? Whereas in something like this, a bowl, or, something like this, it's more like straight lines depending on whether it's wood or glass. The straightness even differs, right? So, and that's also super interesting, is that they really are meticulous about what kind of strokes they're using to better represent a certain material. So that for me was number 2, the simplification of things. And then number 3, finally, which I think is probably ranks highest for me in terms of the things I took away from this book, is the power of composition, and more specifically the power of value composition. And I'm gonna find the exact, okay, so this, I use this in our sketchbooking course, and it's going to be turned into a sketchbooking road later. I find this was for me like a mind-blowing thing, because here we have 2 of the exact same images with a completely different focal point. And I used to, when I wasn't that aware yet of how we can play with composition and values and all of that, for me, it was like I understood from what I saw in tutorials about the concept of focal points and what to do with them, blah, blah, blah. But I always was like, a focal point, you pick it and that's where you render everything, right? And that's not necessarily the case. We can have 2 identical images, and we can sort of push the values in such a way that we create the focal point wherever we want in the image. So it's not about this tower should be the focal point because it sticks out most, it has the most sort of clear white space, it has the clearest silhouette. That's all true, and we can make it the focal point, but we can very much also make this the focal point just because of the way that we're using value. And for me, that was an absolutely mind-blowing concept that to this day I still use when I want to do compositions or when I'm thinking about sketches and everything. I will be like, I will add darker values here or create more contrast here because I want to have my focal point in this area. And I will then use the exact same image and see if I can make another focal point based on the story I want to tell or just the mood I want to create. And that for me was an absolutely brilliant way of looking at it. Again, here's the same thing. Very complex image, this, but exact same kind of, I would say, thinking is, again, you can play with the focal point here. As in, here, we're very much putting an emphasis on the bridge itself and sort of this massive, large graphic block in the middle. And then here, it's much more about the buildings in the background. So again, we're playing with value to create stronger compositional focus. And this is something I saw permeated throughout this book a lot, which I absolutely love and still use to this day. And I'll show you some in my sketchbook books later. And then lastly, what this book has also taught me, and don't get me wrong, it still baffles my mind to this day. But if you look at this is drawn, right? So this is a drawing, and it's not even that it has HDR, like high dynamic range, which a lot of these like photorealism artists use to say that they draw realistically. I don't think that is true. For me, realism is believability. And old masters like John Singer Sargent, they could capture a scene and it wouldn't be about a high dynamic range. It would make you feel as if you're there. And it's the same here for this one. This for me is such a realistic representation of this building, and it's done with so well-positioned values and light values in the right areas that you just can't help but think this was an old photograph, but it's not. It's a drawing. And so, book really taught me the power of understanding values properly and using them in the right places. Not using them everywhere, not have high dynamic range everywhere. Use them in the right places to represent something very believable. So yeah, and to a lesser degree, I sometimes practice this a lot. Like here, I will use more like chaotic lines to still try to represent the material of a tree in this case, for instance, and try to represent the form, but also try to go for a certain composition. And so I'm trying to practice these concepts still to this day, because this is from our latest holiday, I was still trying to do that. And if you look at some of my digital art, or at least drawings, you can see that I very much apply this principle of rendering, albeit a little bit more in my style, maybe sometimes a little bit more sketchy because I'm not painstakingly going through that process. But I'm using these concepts to a T of what I learned in the rendering and pen and ink book. You can see like how I design windows, how I render these characters. I really try to apply that, and as well that focal point principle. Like I'm not rendering everything. I'm keeping a lot of the focus here. So I want you to look here. And this is something I very much took away from that book. Similar with this character, this is very old, but it's a very same principle. And it's like you can see I'm trying to represent sort of the material again, and I'm trying to keep that focal point. I'm trying to follow the form of my character to create more three-dimensionality in the character. So all of that, or at least a large portion of that, I learned from reading this book. Of course, that in combination with properly understanding form, which again, as I said, you can start learning in this book. And of course, you can also start learning it a lot and applying it in the Artwod app. That's all I want to say about this book. I absolutely love this book. This video isn't sponsored or anything by this book. I just really wanted to show you guys one of the major contributing books in my artistic journey, and this is definitely one of them. I'll make more videos about other books that I absolutely love, but if there's one book I would recommend to anyone, especially if you want to stay in the 2D drawing and painting world of design, then hands down, I would recommend this book. So, as always, I hope that was useful. Happy drawing, and I'll see you in the next one.